In this video, we're going to look at an HTML page with an SVG element that is filled in by JavaScript, and it is going to create a design that is inspired by the work by Victor Vasarely called Beta. So here is, and he's got a number of these. This is just one particular one, Beta Rouge Bleu. And then here is mine. I have a sort of a time-dependent one, and it is, again, we sort of have these basic design. Here is squares, but then certain parts of the square are drawn more thickly, and they create this circle. And I'm doing sort of basically the same over here, but with it's also time-dependent. And my the one color is changing in time, and the other color I have is just black. Okay. So let's get started here. So I have a simple basic style, centered. I have in CSS variable called half size. So I'm going to make an SVG element that's 600 by 600, and I define the sign, this thing that is 300. And that also tells me I can also use that for the center if I need to center anything within the code. And here's me styling the SVG element. I'm using the var and the calc, and that's how I sort of access and work with these CSS variables. Okay. Then here is my SVG element that is empty, and I have some number of these squares. I'll say concentric, they're squares, but concentric squares. And I chose 23 in this case. I have a timer. I have a variable for the timer ID. I typically would use this to stop the timer. So down here, when I'm using set interval, I am remembering the ID, and it's a sort of a global variable. So, and I sometimes use that in debugging to stop the timer in case I need to track down an error. So I need it to run for some time, but I don't want to keep running. I have the color changes, the size of the radius is changing in time, and the color is changing in time. So changing the radius based on some time. So I will have some time variable evolve. I have an H here for hue, and that is chosen randomly to start, but will also change in time. So you see different colors at different times. So it was yellow, and then it will, as it builds up, now it's getting sort of a bit greener, and then it will go even more green and then into blue. So that's the hue changing, but the radius changing as a function of the time. I have this saturation chosen at random, but that's just once at the beginning. And I have this, the time dependence is sort of oscillating. And so in addition to the T, another sort of control variable is I made it a W to make it simple, and it will be an angular frequency. So that will be on the inside of a cosine or a sine and multiplying the T. Here's me, I call it M. I'm getting that half size out of the CSS. So this is the code for getting from the CSS variable into a corresponding variable with the same value in JavaScript. And I am taking that sort of half size and dividing it by the number. And so that's the sort of spacing between my squares. So that's this sort of spacing in here. Okay, here's me starting using set interval to start calling this beta function. I'm calling it every 33 milliseconds. And here is then the beta function. And almost everything's in the beta function. I'm evolving the time. I am evolving the hue. The hue is, in this color model, is an angle between 0 and 360. So that's why I'm taking the modulus of with respect to 360. So once I get past 360, I'm going to divide by 360 and just take the remainder. Here is the radius of that circle evolving with time. So it is it's related to the sort of half size, and I'm oscillating from small sort of sometimes when cosine is +1, then I am 0.5 plus 0.375. So I don't get to the full size. The circle is never quite as big as the square. And it never, and then when I'm subtracting, when cosine's -1, I don't get quite down to 0. So the circle never disappears, and it never is the full length of it. That is the effect of this. Okay. I am making a rectangle. This is just a sort of big, like wipe everything that I might have had before out by just starting off with a big black rectangle. So I'll make a rectangle, start it at 0, 0, have it be the full length and the width and height of my SVG image, fill it in with black, add it to my page. So that's just a way of making sure I'm not seeing anything that was there, any remnants of things that were there before, but it's probably overkill because I'm also clearing it out up here. Okay, here is but if I wanted to change the black color, I could evolve the color here. Okay. Here's me finding my calculated color based on the hue, saturation, lightness model. And I'm using a template literal, and my H is a variable. So that's that $sign curly bracket is to insert a variable into the template literal. And so the saturation changed. The saturation was a variable. The hue was a variable. I kept the lightness fixed at 80. Okay, I am looping over the number of rectangles that I'm going to make. I have a variable which is sort of like, I don't know, sort of half the width of one of these inner squares. And I'm making a rectangle that M is my sort of center. So I am subtracting this distance from the center, both horizontally and vertically, and then the width is 2 times that. And it's not filled, it's got the color, and I made the stroke 3. I probably should scale this 3. I have other things scaled based on the size of the image, and I have the 3 fixed, so I should probably make this somehow related to the size of the image, but I did not in this case. Okay, and then I added that. So I'm in a loop and I'm adding this squares. And I just add all the squares first. And this is the sort of thin square. So I've always got the whole sort of sequence of thin squares. And then I do some work to get these additional sort of fatter things. Okay. So now this is my calculation to figure out if my square is completely inside my circle. So that's involving the square root of 2. So that is when the x times the square root of 2, that's the farthest point in the square, if the farthest point in the square, which is the corner, is less than the radius, then the square is entirely inside the circle. And so I just, again, make the entire rectangle, but this time with I increase the stroke width to 9, sort of. So it was like triple the size. So it's going to be, I have this 3, and then I sort of adding 3 on either side, because it's sort of the thickness gets centered around the position. Okay, so it was the same color, but I added another square, and this time with a stroke width of 9, and I added it. So those are the full rectangles, the full squares that are completely interior. And then I have these sort of more partial ones, and that's what I have to deal with next. And then if I'm inside the radius, so now if part of the square is inside the circle, so there are places where I'm not even inside the circle. There are places where I'm entirely in the circle. There are places where I'm not going to be inside the circle at all. And then there are these partial ones. And here's the situation in which I have partial ones. So when my x is less than the radius, then I'm finding the y sort of on a circle, the y corresponding to that x. So a circle would be x squared plus y squared equals the radius squared. And then I'm sort of solving that for a y by saying radius squared minus x squared and taking the square root using the math library in JavaScript. And then I am making sort of 4 lines. So when I have the square, when I'm doing the partial things, they are 4. They're sort of like a right, a left, a top, a bottom. And so I said, and I get an x, I get a y, and so I have an x and a y, and this was giving me the right hand side, and when I'm making a line, I have an x1 and a y1, an x2 and a y2, and I'm sort of making a line with the stroke the same color, the width 9, and adding it, and I have to add 4 of those, a right-hand side, a left-hand side, a top and a bottom. And that's just, am I, on the X, am I adding? On the Y, am I adding? So I add, subtract, make all sorts of combinations there. And there I am then at the bottom. So this is this design based on Victor Vasarely's beta, which sort of has the main unit is squares, but it is sort of defining this circle within the squares. And I used lines and rectangles to create that design. All right, thanks for your attention.